Yeah.
Okay. Well, we thank everybody for joining us on a beautiful Thursday afternoon, 1 week away from our midterm election voting day, even though voting day is kind of a thing of the past, I guess. With all
Voting month.
Yeah, voting month, voting era session. See some familiar faces and some new faces out there, and obviously we've got a whole world of folks logged into Zoom. I'm John Stoll. I'm an alumni of Oakland University. I graduated a long time ago, and I continue to be active with the College of Arts and Sciences. We have a former dean in the audience, I see, and I teach here as well as an adjunct professor. So when I get elected time in the schedule, I am in the journalism department teaching as well. My day job is in communications. Spent 20 years in journalism, most of which were with the Wall Street Journal. Many years here in Detroit and also abroad. Always come back home though. So we're going to be together for an hour today, discussing and previewing the midterm elections, both issues and specific ballot options. This is part of our office hour series, and which has obviously been created by Dave Doolittle. And I want to, first of all, make an introduction to office hours. This is a collaboration between the Oakland University Alumni Association, the Professional and Continuing Education, and Center for Civic Engagement. I want to remind everybody online that you can ask questions. If you have a question in the audience, Aaron, I believe, will be helping us get those questions answered. Questions should be short and to the point so that we can keep moving through our hour and not spend a lot of time and sometimes it's hard to hear. So that is my request of the questions. I'll try to keep mine to the point too, even though I have a lot of opinions. I'm here as the moderator. Nicole Matthew is an associate professor of political science in her 10th year at OU. So previously she was a postdoctorate fellow at the Center for the Study of the Democratic Institutions at Vanderbilt University. Shout out to Nashville. Her research focuses on a very interesting intersection. I could talk to her all day. It's the role of religion and parties in Congress. So go ahead. You can have the floor, and then we'll take questions. Go. I'm sure Thanksgiving.
I'm available for Thanksgiving dinner.
I was going to say, I'm sure Thanksgiving is extremely interesting at your house. Dave Doolittle is a rock star. He's a professor of political science and director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. He makes us proud all the time by being a regular commentator in the media. But most importantly, he teaches here courses on campaigns and elections, Congress, political parties, interest groups, and other areas of American politics. Doolittle has published 13 books and written dozens of articles and book chapters on subjects ranging from the role of professional consultants in U.S. elections to campaign finance. Doolittle is also a former political science congressional fellow on Capitol Hill. So thanks a lot for doing this. Thanks for letting me be part of it. I look at this as somewhat of my education. Even though I listen to a lot of national, I don't get deep enough into Michigan related subjects, but they are always interconnected. But as the great John Lees in the political science department taught me 25 years ago, all politics are local. I wonder, you may disagree with that.
No, John Lees and Tip O'Neill always right on that one.
Yeah.
And before we get into questions, John, thank you from the Center for Civic Engagement, the Department of Political Science, the Alumni Association. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you giving us your time.
My pleasure. No, my pleasure. I want to ask a question that wasn't on the sheet to start.
Awesome.
To throw you a curveball, but it's not really a curveball. I just wonder, I think in journalism, we often started with the context and we never got to nuance. So hopefully we get more into nuance today, but I do want to start with the context. And I have my opinion on this, which is sometimes it's going to be different for everybody, whether you're in the throes of raising children or you have more time to contemplate what's going on in the national scene, or you're actually out in the community. If you're on social media and working in a grocery store, you're going to have a different view. But we have had some heated times. And as a student of history, I always chuckle because it's very hard to say America's never been in a worse position or relationships have never been worse. You can say that at a lot of points. But I do wonder, both of you, given your different perspectives, different views, what you see in the classroom, in your research, and obviously in your spectating of American politics, when it comes to the environment, and it comes to the tone, particularly when it's politics are the backdrop, where are we at versus maybe the last couple of years, pandemic, Trumpism, obviously the contentious issue of abortion has been front and center, but where are we at as people? I mean, are we in a little bit more of a relaxed state? How would you kind of talk about the context against which this election will be taking place?
Well, certainly if you look at the news, read your Facebook news feed, it looks like people are highly polarized. I think it is a little bit of a case where there's a silent majority of people that are not posting on Facebook and are not talking about politics all the time, that really have quite centrist views about things. But the voices that are being heard are certainly polarized, and that contributes to kind of this apathy, cynicism about politics that a lot of people have, that we can't come together and solve problems. And I think that it's a little overblown. We did have several bipartisan COVID relief packages passed during the pandemic. We had a bipartisan infrastructure bill passed. And so there obviously is some legislative accomplishments that are happening. We have very bipartisan support for the war in Ukraine, which is an issue that a lot of Americans are united behind, and the two parties are united behind. Other issues obviously are a lot more contentious, like abortion. And I think education is becoming a lot more contentious than it has in the past. So it's not as bad as some people say, but it's still we're still dealing with kind of historically high levels of party polarization.
Yeah, it's bad, right? I mean, but it's not the first time the country's been divided. It won't be the last time. I think that it's not that it's cyclical, but you see these waves over time of polarization, both in the electorate and in Congress. Nicole knows much more about that than I do in her study of the institution. But I also think there's, and I would like to echo her point about bipartisan legislative accomplishments. And I think that not only at the federal level, but at the state level, we've seen that as well. Those are the things that never get reported, right? You never hear about all of the legislative work that does happen. Some of it's minor, but some of it's a big deal, right? The COVID relief, the infrastructure bills, those are big deals. I think the difference today is we have an outlet to let everybody know how polarized we are, right? I mean, it's social media that gives us this, in some cases, megaphone for that boisterous minority, right? That I think exists. So I'm not so sure the polarization is all that different, but I think the fact that we have a very readily available outlet, to be able to spew whatever nasty stuff we want to spew is a big difference.
Yeah. One of the truths I think that I've always heard is that midterms are never good for the party in power. There did feel like there was quite a tailwind earlier this year for Democrats with the abortion issue primarily. But watching your comments the other night on, I think it was Channel 2, that seems to be changing. I mean, what's the view for the Democrats going in? I mean, is it status quo that it's not going to be a good year for the party in power, or are there some specific issues that kind of shake up the playing field right now, particularly on the national level? Yeah,
I think it's just historical pattern that is rarely broken, that the midterm is bad for the party of the president. And in terms of the House of Representatives, only twice in the last 100 years or so have candidates of the president's party gained seats in the House of Representatives. A little bit more in the Senate, which just have different dynamics. But those two instances, I would argue, are both they're certainly outliers, but I think they're artificial. We can talk about that if you like. But to answer your question, I think the fundamentals were always going to be bad for the Democrats. I think there was a bit of a reprieve over the summer as the issue of abortion became more front and center for more voters, and frankly, Democrats highlighted it in their campaigns and in their television advertisements. But now the issue space has shifted back to, I think, Republican advantage on the economy. People are sort of they've made up their mind about abortion, and they're not changing it. But these newer elements, I think, are starting to be part of the conversation.
I think in general, what you said, the president's party tends to do poorly during the midterm, and with Democrats having control of all three chambers, there's some blame there for the handling of the economy that it's very hard to shed or blame the other party for that. One thing that I would say that's changing is that people are voting in a more partisan way, and so these things like the electoral cycle do not matter as much because you don't have as many independents or ticket splitters. I would say that midterms generally favor the Republican Party because they tend to do better at turning people out for midterms, although the 2018 midterms were historically great for Democrats. So we'll see if that carries over, because once people start voting in a midterm, they're more likely to keep voting in a midterm. So that might be something that favors Democrats. But I would say the most important thing is the number of retirements that happened early on, the Democrats deciding not to run for re-election, especially at the congressional level. And that's not something that an abortion decision by the Supreme Court could reverse this summer, because the decision had already been made not to run. And so Democrats are not having the incumbency advantage in as many districts as they could have if they had, had a more positive outlook or more Democrats stayed and fought for their seats.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I would add to that those Democrats that retired were acting in a very strategic way early in the cycle, because they know history, right? They know that a presidential midterm is going to be bad for their party if they're the same party as the president. I would also say too that because of that, usually advantages the outcome, right? Where incumbents retire, maybe they have trouble recruiting some candidates to run in those districts, and the Republicans should be in a position now where they can really dominate, and they're not going to do as well as maybe some models would predict that they should, because they have had trouble recruiting candidates. I think especially in the closest Senate races right now, you look at the candidates that are on the ballot, and you have to wonder, is that the best the Republicans have to offer? And if they could have recruited somebody better, would they be in such a tight race?
Yeah, I think both parties made some poor strategic decisions. I think for the Democrats, Andy Levin running against Haley Stevenson instead of staying and competing in this, they say it's a newly formed district, but had most of his old district in it. He could have competed in that district. It was slight Republican tilt. He decided to run in a safe Democratic district. That resulted in probably the Republicans going to win that district that he abandoned. Republican Peter Meyer decided to run in a district that was even more liberal, because in an election environment like this, maybe Republicans could actually win that district. He ended up not winning the primary by a very small margin. And so that's kind of an opportunity that the Republicans didn't seize to get a candidate in that district that's more likely to win.
Let's stay on that redistricting for just a minute, because this is really the first election post redistricting the actions here in Michigan. Seems to be, if you're really paying attention, an important variable in this election, from the tip of the state, at least the lower part of the state, to where we're at right here. It matters. And what are we going to learn? What are we looking for? How does this affect the outcome?
So I think the biggest thing is that the state house and the state senate are in play for Democrats, which without this redistricting, I don't think would be the case at all. And I'm a cord cutter, so I don't watch that much TV, but I did turn on my digital antenna and watch Jeopardy the other day. And I was just shocked by the number of ads for state legislative candidates. So this is one of the most competitive state legislatures in the country. You're seeing a lot of money pouring in. There are several competitive races in this metro area for state house and state senate, and it's definitely something that is the result of the redistricting that's giving Democrats a possible into taking control of the state legislature, which would be a big deal, especially if the Democratic governor gets reelected.
I think your question is reminded me of one thing about redistricting that I think it's overlooked very often, and that is the importance of it is undeniable, right? Because it sets the most basic rules of the game. It sets the geographic areas in which candidates are going to run, and in which groups of individuals are put together as potential constituents for those candidates. Again, I think that's on the money about the state house and state senate. And I mean, it's going to come down to, I think, maybe two state senate on the state senate side, two state senate districts in Macomb County that are neck and neck. And, you know, they're probably neck and neck in part because of redistricting, right? Because Macomb County, that's a Republican county these days, right? And
it's not
it's not the old Reagan Democrats anymore, right? They're Trump Republicans.
That was very interesting when we were covering it at the Wall Street Journal. The mischaracterization of what Macomb County is. I live on the cusp on northern Macomb County, and I don't think any of journalists have ever been.
Right.
Because it's like, you know, McMansion Central.
Right. And, you know, but some of those, and I'd have to go back and look, my hunch is that the two state senate districts that are really competitive, that you see all those ads for, I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars just pouring in all the time. I would bet that they're part in Macomb and part in Wayne County. That's how those got to be competitive. That would be my hunch.
Where does all that money come from?
Outside groups.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just all over the country, right? People are pumping money into these.
Seeing Macomb, but that your last point about it all over the country.
Yeah.
Is really important. That this seemingly local election is influenced by somebody in Texas or California.
It can be for sure, right?
Yeah.
We have to go look at the campaign finance disclosures, but my suspicion is that money's coming in from all over the country, and it's because the control of the state senate could hinge on the outcome of those two races, and that person in Texas wants one side or the other to be in control.
Yeah. Talk about something. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just going to say very few other state legislative races across the country are in place. Very strange to have such close races and control of the chamber be in play. And that's why you're seeing money come in. Money's a lot more strategic these days. It's focused on elections where there's, you know, something's at stake, and there's a lot at stake in Michigan.
And I like your point that redistricting plays a big role in Michigan's at play situation right now. So it's not without consequence that this happened. You know, I didn't want to ask this question now. I want to ask it later. But when you talk about the role of money, I think I understand Cheryl McGinnis's question, which is, as a 15-year incumbent, I think on school boards. I wanted to wait on this, but school boards are so fascinating what's going on there.
Yeah.
And there's outside money swaying people on the school board right now, which are supposed to be nonpartisan, which make it very difficult for the schools, those who are running for office to respond, but they become very partisan. Is this the new norm? And when you look at school boards, are they being a little bit overblown, or is there really a shift going on in how contentious and how much people are paying attention to? Obviously, critical race theory and a couple other things have brought this to the fore, but this is a new playing field. Are we bored? Are we looking for new places to pick on? Or
no, I have a theory about this, and I'll try to keep it short. But it all goes back to Terry McAuliffe and the Virginia gubernatorial race in 2021, right? When Terry McAuliffe said something to the effect of, "I don't think parents should have any say in what happens in their kids' schools."
Yeah.
Right. Well, parents went, "You got to be kidding me! What are you talking about?" Right. So my theory is that when things are going fine and swimmingly, parents and the community are fine are happy to say, look, you all run the schools, right? Superintendent, school board, you guys do. Fine, I'm good. But when it becomes a salient issue, which it has become with questions about what's being taught, questions about what books are in the library, right? People all of a sudden they peak up, right? They're like, wait a minute, what is going on here? And now they change their tune from being, I think, being fine with the trustee model of representation, right? I trust you to make those decisions to, hey, wait a minute now, I want you to act as a delegate and use that model of representation where, hey, you need to listen closer to what I'm saying. And when parents don't get that, they run for school board.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's a lot about saliency of the issue that has popped up and is, I don't think, going away for a while.
Yeah, I don't think it's a new issue at all. I mean, to me, it sounds a little bit like We Got Trouble Right Here in River City, and that's a musical that takes place 100 years ago with, dirty books. What is different is that Democrats used to have a clear edge on education issues, and so they were the ones bringing up education in campaigns. And this cycle, we have Republicans bringing up the education issue because they feel that they are closer to the median voter on that issue than Democrats are.
We talked a bit about the races in Michigan for state. Liz Cheney came out and endorsed House Democrat Alyssa Slotkin. I mean, is this going to help? Listen, if we could use that for a broader aperture of Michigan's congressional seats, what's at play, what's important. We talked a little bit about Stevens and a couple other races, but there feels like a little bit less of a focal point on this in the media right now, and I'd love to get your take on what we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, so Slotkin's in a very competitive district, and she's always been in a very competitive district. She's always had kind of a Republican advantage district, and so her whole career, which is not that long, but she has been kind of doing the moderate thing and being centrist. And I would say the issue that she's not centrist on would be abortion, and she's campaigning heavily on abortion rights. And I think she's counting on some Republican women to join her, and that is why Liz Cheney was, I would say, an asset to Alyssa Slotkin. I don't think Liz Cheney has a huge following, but there's a little political cover there. If you want a split ticket, maybe, if Liz Cheney, who is fairly conservative, is supporting her, then that's helpful. What I do think is interesting about it is that I think it's an interesting move for Liz Cheney.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, why does Liz Cheney do this?
So I think that it might, if her intention is running for as the anti-Trump candidate in the Republican nomination for president in 2024, I don't know if it's a good move to go around endorsing people from the other party. But if you plan to run as an independent, perhaps, if you want to be picked by a Democratic candidate for a cabinet position or something like that, I think it's a good move. But it's definitely interesting.
It's a little Joe Lieberman to me, just like, I'm going to go find the people that I like, not the people that are on my team.
And dipping one's toe in the water of the other party, right? I mean, and, Liz Cheney can't win a primary in the presidential race. I mean,
if there's 20 candidates, she could.
Well, and there might be. I'm not convinced that it's a big boost for Slotkin.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it might be a net negative because, Liz Cheney does not have a huge following, but she does among Republicans.
Yeah, she means
and
something.
And they hate her.
She means something.
Right? They hate her. And so what's it going to do, right? It's going to energize the Republican base in that district even more. And so folks,
people who hate Liz Cheney are not going to vote for Alyssa Slotkin, period.
True, but the question for me is, are they going to vote at all?
Her opponent.
Well, were they going to vote at all? Right? They might have been, an unactivated Republican who was just going to stay home. Right now, that might just light the fire that's needed.
And does that affect other things on the ballot, like Prop 3?
It could,
yeah.
Right? I mean, any new Republican that is coming to vote who wasn't going to is likely going to vote for more, especially somebody who is voting against Alyssa Slotkin because she got endorsed by Liz Cheney, right? They're going to carry down through the ballot, right? So that could help Tudor Dixon, that could help Matt DePerno, et cetera.
Let's back up a little bit to one of the things that you had mentioned the other day, which is a changing dynamic is the role of the economy, which by now we thought maybe inflation would be under control. I was telling you, I went to the grocery store to buy some hot dogs this morning, and I felt like I was buying filet mignon.
Yeah.
So it hasn't changed. Do voters believe that their vote actually affects the economy? How does that work with the psychology of a voter when they start to say, I am fed up, whether it's gas prices or something else, how does that connection come into play when you're actually, I can see it on a presidential level, but in a midterm, how practically would people see this, how they cast the vote actually impact?
I guess I think I see it more as a reaction to frustration than I do some sort of policy solution, right? I mean, people are pissed, and they're pissed at the president. Whether that's right or wrong is neither here nor there, right? It's just that that's who people look to lead on the economy. And when it goes south and you have high inflation and high gas prices and high hot dog costs, right?
Yeah.
That stinks. But people can't take their frustration out on the president, so they're left to take it out on candidates that are from his party. I think that it's not more complicated than that, or what am I missing?
I think that inflation tends to hurt Democrats more because Democrats are associated with spending government money, and that is inflationary. Tax cuts are also inflationary, but Republicans get a little more of a pass on the inflation question. I think had Build Back Better passed, I think this blame would be worse on Democrats because that was a huge spending program, and they really cut it back for the Inflation Reduction Act. But I think it's very hard for the Democrats to argue that, yeah, inflation has been bad and we're the party to fix it. I think the better argument is inflation has been bad and we're the party to make it less bad for Americans who are low on the income scale. That's the argument that they're offering. I don't know if Republicans actually have a plan to reduce inflation, but they don't have a plan to have a bunch of new government spending.
Spending and interest rates and things like that. That obviously the Fed's front and center on what they're doing. I don't know how many day-to-day voters, including myself, really understand the relationship there of high interest rates versus inflation. But I do understand that the Fed has been politicized pretty heavily, like it or not. It's just the way it goes, and I wonder if we start to see that. Well, at least we'll get different policies if we have a different party in.
Well, will we? Right? I mean, I don't know. I think what's the result if Republicans take back the House and Senate, which they're going to take the House, so we just leave it at that, right? There's no legislation coming out of Congress.
Right.
If they get both chambers, there might be legislation coming out of Congress, but is President Biden going to sign it? So I think it's, I'm not sure we'll get different policies, right? I think maybe and I'm one who believes that and I think economists would agree, that the president gets too much credit for a good economy and too much blame for a bad economy, right?
Right.
But at the same time, we saw it right when President Biden came into office, right? People, investors and the market and whatever that means, but that's just sort of how I think about it, right? They made some assumptions about what a Biden administration was going to mean for them,
right?
And that we started to see shifts, right? So maybe if Republicans are in charge of Congress, those same folks think the environment's going to be better for them. And that
begins to condition investors.
Right.
Well, this is my hot take, is that I think if Republicans control these one chamber of Congress, it'll be better for Biden because he will have a foil to fight against.
Yeah, right.
Right now, who's he fighting against? Joe Manchin, a member of his own party.
Right.
So I think it will set Democrats up better for the following presidential election if Republicans have some share of the blame for what's going to happen, and policy-wise, I think what you'll see is a big battle over budget priorities because they have to pass a budget every year. But you're not going to see a lot of legislation. I'm hoping that maybe we'll have a change in daylight savings time, possibly.
That's a reason enough to vote, right?
There could be your bipartisan success, right? And it make everybody
the
really.
Senate did it. The Senate did their part. The House didn't do anything.
Okay, so at the risk of dominating the rest of the time, but by the way, if you have questions, feel free to just raise
Shout
your
'em out.
hand. Yeah. And online as well. Welcome more than just me asking these questions, but I think I'm not going to Big Gretch versus Tudor. I mean, I was really interested in your comments the other night that Tudor, you know, this is not a political thing. This is watching politics for so long. It has a fighting chance here. I mean, how's this?
I think she does. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what Nicole thinks about I mean, I see polls that have got it, you know, Gretchen Whitmer up 9 to tie, right? I mean, so I'm assuming it's somewhere in there. Does Tudor have a shot?
I'm not staying up election night. I don't.
Not for that.
Possibly. I think the Democrats definitely have an advantage in all these statewide races because Republicans chose candidates that were not the ideal candidates for a swing state. And I think if they had had a different field of candidates, that we would be talking about this race being neck and neck, and we're talking about it possibly being neck to neck, and that's a big difference.
Yeah, I would co-sign right with that, absolutely.
And is Prop 3, which is obviously the abortion proposition, is this at all playing a factor in support for Gretchen Whitmer, additional catalyzing people, even if they didn't like her, they want to vote in a certain direction on this, or to the opposite, to Tudor Dixon's advantage? I mean, what role could this prop play on election day?
I think it's definitely going to drive turnout higher than it would be if that was not on the ballot. The question is, how is it going to drive turnout? I think that initially it seems like a good issue for Democrats, but the opponents of Proposition 3, which by the way is related to the abortion, putting abortion rights into the Michigan Constitution.
Yeah, versus the 1930 year.
Right. It would overturn the current 1931 law that is not being enforced because the court has had an injunction. So if voters decide to pass Prop 3, the court case will be moot because the law will not be in effect anymore. And if voters decide not to pass Prop 3, then it's going to end up in the courts for sure. So
in the beginning, this seemed to be a
good issue for Democrats, and I think that you can tell because of the Republican messaging on it is not abortion stops a beating heart. The messaging is it's too extreme, it's confusing. So they're already kind of conceding that this is kind of an issue that they're not in the majority on. But can they defeat it because it's confusing? Yes, they can, because it is confusing.
Right.
It is confusing what's going to happen if it fails, because we don't know how the court is going to act. Okay, so that feeds into the confusion. It's confusing because it's a very complicated area of law. It uses big terms like compelling state interest that is, you know, a very confusing question in my PS 1100 midterm, you know. So I don't think voters are going to look at this and be like, wow, this is super straightforward. I know how to vote on this. And so this idea that it is confusing, I think that is like kind of gaining some steam. So I think it's gonna be very interesting to see if it passes. I think it's probably a little more likely to pass than not pass.
I think that's probably correct. But what's interesting is as the governor's race has tightened, the polling on Prop 3 has tightened too, right? And I think that
in the same direction.
Yes. It had what, 60-some%, 65%
indicating stronger support for Tudor Dixon, stronger support against.
Correct. The tightening has gone in the same direction. Correct. And I think it's because the messaging has been really effective, right? Where
they are not saying anything.
No to abortion.
It's just that this is too extreme.
And too confusing. Yeah, right. So I think that was really a smart. It might have been their only choice strategically, but I think it was a really smart one because it works, right? And I think that we've seen that. I also think too that the pro-life side is not just sitting idly by. I think that they are very much energized by this as well, right? The pro-life side here in Michigan and across the country has been fighting to overturn Roe v. Wade for 50 years. And if they allow Prop 3 to pass or Prop 3 passes, that all goes for naught in Michigan, right? So I think they are really going to push turnout on that side as well.
I think one thing though is that I think abortion used to be a very good issue for Republicans because they were kind of, abortion was probably more widespread and more widely available than the average American wanted. But now with the Supreme Court decision, now it's less widespread and less widely available than the average person wanted. So it's now become a better issue for Democrats. But I still think this proposition, it's very iffy if it's going to pass. I think it's probably slightly more likely than not.
Pass or fail. Just want to ask one follow-up question on that. Yeah.
Why did they have it as a proposition instead of ask the state legislature to pass a new law?
So the question is why make it a Prop 3 instead of having the state legislature pass it as a new law?
Because the legislature is currently controlled by Republicans, so it's very unlikely that they're going to pass an abortion rights bill right now. But I do think that if the Proposition 3 fails, you might see some legislative action on it, whether or not Republicans or Democrats are in control, because I think there are some changes that people would like to make to this 1930 law.
I think that's an interesting question because I think you heard some folks talk about early on in this process that maybe the legislature should pass a sort of a compromise bill, right, that would get passed and then put to the governor's desk, force her to make a choice, and rather than rely on this ballot proposition. Obviously it didn't happen, but it wouldn't. Nothing is stopping the legislature from doing that. They just are. They want the issue just like the Democrats do, right?
And this isn't the end of it. I mean, regardless of how it goes, yes or no. Is this an issue that, given the status of Roe, is this an issue that's going to continue to be in play 2024 and beyond?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, abortion's always
So no matter how the vote
a rhetorical.
goes,
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's not it's not so much an electoral issue, but a court issue, right? No matter if it passes or it fails,
right,
the courts are going to have a lot to say about it.
Right. I was more talking about this as a ballot issue in Michigan. This is maybe a very unique time.
If it fails,
the courts are going to, it's incumbent upon the courts to continue.
Yeah, I mean, if it fails, you can always come back.
Right.
I
think we had another question. Yeah.
You were mentioning about, the Republicans on the ballot were basically, for all intents and purposes, Trumpers, most of them, and that might be why the Democrats can take control of the governorship and the state legislature and stuff. Do you think, though, this 2022 election might be a situation where kind of the Trump Republicans and Trump voters are like, well, we failed to break down the door this time, but we're going to do it next time? That seems to be the way the political trend within the GOP base since 2016. I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, kind of the continued takeover of the GOP by not just Trump himself, because Trump's going to be gone one day, but the voters who are more energized in that direction. I see the decline of moderate Republicans and the increase in Trump Republicans. What's your general thought on that as it applies to Michigan?
Yeah, the question would be for 2022 Michigan national as well, but Michigan, that this is an opportunity for Trump voters to make another statement, right? To continue to knock out the wing of the GOP that they don't like and take it to the extreme that they'd like to see it go.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, the question's already been answered by the primaries when Trump endorsed Republicans did very well in primary elections across the country, including here in Michigan, right? I mean, Matt DePerno, Christina Caramo at the Republican endorsement convention in the spring. They won close, but they won. Caramo more so than DePerno, but then you go over to that third congressional district we were talking about, and John Gibbs. But we can't talk about that without mentioning that he may not have won that primary had the Democratic Party not spent about $500,000 to boost him right before the primary, right? I mean, I think that's another aspect of this that is a fascinating piece of the
The
2020
strategy
story.
being to put money behind people that they saw as extreme, to boost them in the short term, so that the long term.
So because the Democrats see them
option look better.
as more easily defeatable.
Yeah.
I think this election cycle's proved that you need Trump's endorsement to win the primary, but you maybe do not need it to win the general election. I think Georgia is a good example. The governor, Kemp, stood up to Trump, did not find 10,000 extra votes that Trump wanted. He's doing very well against a national figure, Stacey Abrams, who's running for governor. He's polling well ahead of her versus Herschel Walker, Trump's endorsee, who's having a very hard time against Raphael Warnock. It could go either way. The Senate race in Georgia is something that should be easily won by Republicans.
And you know what? And that's another that's one of those examples of a bad job of candidate recruitment, right? I mean, Herschel Walker sounds great. It's famous star, right? He's a god in Georgia because he was so good for the Bulldog, right? But the fact that Kemp is far outpacing his rival and Walker is not. I mean, it takes you back to 2020 when, frankly, Trump's rhetoric after the November election cost Republicans both of those seats in that Georgia runoff. And that's another thing, right? We're likely to have another month of this in Georgia when the control of the Senate could swing on that one race, that one runoff in Georgia.
And how likely is it that is such a key part of the narrative in 2022 about votes counted? I mean, it almost feels like it's fair game all over the place that elections could be stolen and what have you. I mean, is this an issue that's diffused somewhat, or is it as hot as ever, the legitimacy of what's taking place at polling?
I think it's as hot as ever, and I think it is. We're in for a rough week, I think, because
In November we should take a week off.
probably, yeah. All of the signals are that it's going to take a while to count all the absentees, and it's the same kind of scenario we saw in 20 when Republicans were leading when everybody went to bed because they didn't want to wake up. And then you wake up and then all the absentees have come in and all of a sudden the other candidates ahead and people are like, what the hell happened? Right.
What's likely to happen in terms of what we see? Who's going to be looking stronger before we go to bed? Who's likely to get that tailwind from the absentees being gone?
If the Democrats are winning when we go to bed, then in Michigan, then I think they're going to be winning because I think the last votes that are going to be counted are going to be from Detroit.
Okay.
And that's going to be heavily Democratic. So I think if Democrats are behind, I think it's still, could be a different result in the morning when you wake up. But if Democrats are ahead, if Alyssa Slotkin wins, I think that'll be a good signal that Democrats are doing well. If she's behind, that could be a big signal that it's going to be kind of a Republican wave in Michigan. I do want to say something about the results of the election. People question it. I think certainly there's a minority of people in America that are, willing to question every election result that they don't see personally counted themselves by hand. And I think that group is very galvanized and outspoken, but I do not think that there's as much appetite from the American people in general as there was in 2000. So remember in 2020.
So 2000 had its own.
It did, yeah.
In 2020, you had all these states changing rules to accommodate voting during the COVID pandemic, and things like extending deadlines for ballots to get in, adding additional boxes, having this early voting by car. These are things that a lot of Americans were like, I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know if that's, how our state should run the election. And this year, elections are running in a very normal way. They're not using different COVID restrictions. So I don't think there's going to be as much, and
not as much vulnerability.
Especially if Republicans do well, I don't think you're going to see people questioning the results of the election.
Well, and I wonder, have states reverted back to pre-COVID sort of rules and administration? Is that your sense?
Well, Michigan is a weird case because we changed our constitution
Right.
to allow no reason absentee ballot voting. 2020 was the first year of that. So, actually 2018.
No, it passed
No,
in 18.
It passed in 18. So 2020 was the first year of that. So we're now in the second election cycle where we're operating under new rules. But in a lot of other states, they're reverting to the previous rules unless they have changed them in the interim.
Some things in Michigan did change though, right? And the sort of a late shift, the legislature passed and the governor signed a new law that allows local clerks to count absentee ballots before election day. And what's interesting is many of them, some of them, and I couldn't list a number, but some of them are not doing it, right? Which is just strange to me.
You can't count them before election day. You can pre-process them
You can
before
open
election
them.
day. You can open them. You can verify the signatures, which obviously is going to speed the process along. But because the legislature waited so long to grant that privilege, some cities weren't set up to be able to hire a few extra people to help with the pre-processing. We did have pre-processing in cities above a certain population in 2020. So in larger cities, it's not really going to change.
And I think your question about early vote or what it looks like on election night, I think is different in different states, right? So we're going to all watch these 4 or 5 really hot U.S. Senate races,
Right. Which are
Pennsylvania, Georgia, New Hampshire, Arizona, Nevada, right? I mean, that control is going to hinge on those 5,
right.
But
Pennsylvania, we're not going to know the results right away because they allow in Michigan, it has to be received by election day.
Right.
In Pennsylvania, it has to be postmarked by election day. So they're still going to be counting things.
votes are going to, like Friday, votes are going to be coming, right? Which is absolutely. I do think that but in a state like Florida, right, where we have interesting early vote numbers because they have party registration, Republicans are, relatively speaking, crushing it when it comes to having their voters turn out and get ballots in early. So that might be a state where you don't see the same kind of trend as we're likely to see in Michigan, with Democrats ahead on election, Republicans ahead on election night, and Democrats ahead with abstentees.
And Florida is a fast counting state. They changed their election laws after the debacle in 2000, and so you'll have results from Florida like ASAP.
We'll go back to Florida in just a bit. Let's come back to Michigan. Props 1 and 2 have gotten far less pub, but they're important. Prop 2 is one that is very interesting about voter rights and would amend Michigan's constitution by protecting. I mean, this is the way it's built, by protecting and expanding voter rights. I know there's plenty of dissent on the other side that has, but it just isn't getting as much. What's going on with 2? What do we expect?
Prop 2 changes almost nothing for the regular person and how they interact with elections. It will allow for early voting, but you can already do that by just getting an absentee ballot, filling it out, and handing it to the clerk. The only change with early voting would be like you get an early ballot and then you feed it into a ballot machine instead of putting it back in the envelope.
Yeah, so it's procedural.
You will not, the average person will see no difference if that proposal passes. What could happen if it does not pass is that the legislature could pass this secure the vote petition that is not on the ballot, could get on the ballot in 2 years, but it didn't make the deadline for this ballot. But importantly, it could go to the legislature and be passed without the governor needing to weigh in on it, because Michigan has kind of weird initiative rules. And that, I think, was the plan from the start, to not have it go on the ballot, but have the legislature be able to pass it. And if the legislature passes it, it would roll back certain provisions like currently, if you don't have an ID, you can sign an affidavit that you are who you are and still be allowed to vote on a regular ballot. If the secure the vote plan passes, you'd have to vote on a provisional ballot and later prove your identity. So things like that could be changed by the legislature. If Proposition 2 passes, it will basically codify things into the state constitution. That is currently how we practice elections. And so basically defend against Republicans in the legislature passing this for the vote.
And I think there's an interesting messaging component to this, to the folks who are for Prop 2, which is, they say in some of their advertising that it will make voter ID part of the Michigan Constitution, which of course is
Right.
what the other side wants to do more, right? But they have taken a cue, right, that voter ID is actually pretty popular,
Yeah.
and that they want to note and claim, and accurately, I guess, that it would make it permanent, right?
Yeah. So, well, not as catalytic as Prop 3, it still is something that, for people in the know that care about this stuff, it may get them out to vote.
Yeah, I think if Prop 3 wasn't there, this one would be the divider of the.
And the thing I found interesting about Prop 1, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be really a term limit.
Yeah, it's a term limit
Expanding
and
the
financial
term limit.
disclosure
Yeah.
amendment, yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. Currently we have 6-year term limits in the House, 8 years in the Senate, and a complaint that is bipartisan complaint in the House is that people are there for such a short time. They could be chairing a committee their first year, second year, or third year in the House. And so what this would do, currently you can run, you can be in the state legislature 14 years total, 6 in the House, 8 in the Senate. This would put a 12-year cap, so it actually decreases the total amount of time you could be there, but you could spend that 12 years either in the House or the Senate or some combination of both. So hopefully we'll improve things in the House if it passes, with people having more experience before they're thrown into chairing a committee early in their career.
We're coming up against time. I do want to ask a very interesting question that came in from, of course, an anonymous attendee, but it's a good one. I think we did hit redistricting, which is a question that came up. We did hit that earlier. We can revisit that offline, but with Tudor Dixon and Gretchen Whitmer, I'm kind of asking the question backward. Is there a message that average voters and the polarization of parties is there any reason to think that these are two extreme examples of their parties, or should we see them as very indicative and proxies of where the GOP and Democratic Party are today?
That's a great question.
The questions are those two
Are
candidates extreme?
they really indicative of where the two parties are today, or are they operating on some level of the extreme of the two parties in their own ways?
I mean, I guess I would answer that two ways. One, I don't think Tudor Dixon was the most extreme Republican in the prime part, right? So I mean, the second piece of my answer is that I think being a Republican in Michigan or a Democrat in Michigan is very different than if you're a Republican in California or a Democrat in California, or a Democrat in Texas and a Republican in Texas, right? I think there are big regional, cultural, political differences, right, that drive those things, right?
I wouldn't say Whitmer is particularly extreme. She ran on fixing the damn roads,
Right.
which is about as centrist of a platform that you could run on 4 years ago. I do think that at the beginning of the pandemic, she took a harder line on restrictions than most other governors in the nation. And then at some point, she kind of did a 180-degree turn and
Well,
was
she
very
made her
hands-off.
point, and then
Very
they tried.
hands-on.
I mean, does there an
I-
overhang at all of those that decision?
Yeah,
It seemed that she got a very good national platform for being on the extreme side of an issue, and then when it really met, later on, she dialed way back in. And
Yeah,
what are
well,
people
I
going to
think
remember?
she's still on the hook for, people are gonna blame her for kids being online for school for so long. Even though technically, she didn't shut down schools for that long. I think at the very beginning of the pandemic, and then around Thanksgiving, Christmas, during the first year of the pandemic, were the only time schools were required to shut down. There was a compromise with the state legislature that made it up to the local school districts. But I think there's enough there that you could paint her as extreme if you wanted to. And then, Tudor Dixon is, I mean, both of them are currently running on very bread and butter issues like the price of cereal. I think is Gretchen Whitmer's commercial in front of a bunch of cereal boxes. And Tudor Dixon is running on kind of these educational issues, giving parents more say, but really kind of centrist issues, I think. So whether they are in their, private life or once they win office, if they're going to be extreme, I don't know. But how they're running their campaigns, they're certainly like taking a kind of centrist stance.
All right, let me close with my national media question, which is, what will the election results, what can the election results tell us about Ron DeSantis' ability to beat Trump in a primary? Which, thank you, anonymous attendee, for prompting this.
Well, DeSantis is going to run away with it in Florida, right? With his reelection. I think that will put him on a very strong foundation.
Yeah.
Should he choose to challenge the former president. If the former president even throws his hat in the ring for 24, right? That's not a done deal. I mean, I guess he would, but
Maybe we'll be watching the results on next week to find out.
I mean, the rational person in me says he will look at how his endorsed candidates do.
To the point that Professor Matthews made
Absolutely.
earlier, that this may be an opportunity for people who weren't endorsed to do well.
But
to
you know
send a
what?
message that you don't need that endorsement.
Very true, but I don't think that's the rational person, right? I mean,
Right. That's the three.
so, but he's not going to look at that, right?
Right.
My bet is he runs.
What do you think?
My bet is that he runs no matter what.
I think DeSantis is probably the most Trump-esque candidate that does not owe anything to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He didn't gain prominence because of Donald Trump. He gained prominence probably because of the line he took during the pandemic and how he ran the state during the pandemic. And so I think it's gonna, if they both run, I think it'll be very interesting because I don't think they're separated on the issues, and it'll be more of a question of personality. And if DeSantis is, he might be kind of an out that the Republican Party can take to slowly transition itself away from Trump rather than having to make a clean break from Trump
But
in order to like be competitive in elections.
It goes back to the previous question about the, sort of who controls the party, right? I think it's up to the voters in the primaries though. And you look at the polls now, I mean, it's far away, but Trump crushes everybody.
That's because of name recognition.
Well, fair enough. I mean,
Yeah, he's popular. It's not name recognition. It's because people like
Republicans like him. Yeah, right. I mean, but it's Republicans like him.
Well, one of the points made in the audience by a couple of attendees was that his popularity, obviously, it doesn't seem to be waning. We've got a week to go until election, which is an eternity, and then we can start talking about 2024.
Yeah, right.
On November 9th, when we meet again, Wednesday night, 7 p.m., we'll have another office hours, virtual only. We'll cut you off.
Go right ahead, Charlie.
And because that will we'll be able to talk about a lot of the things we've been trying to predict today. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you to all of the departments that come together to make this happen. And thank you for doing this, because I've really been enriched by being able to participate in this online. So thank you for
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Get out and vote.